Today we're going to look at Greek sculpture and pots, basically Greek art but excluding the architecture. We are going to start with Cycladic art, and I'm going to miss out Minoan and Mycenaean art at the moment because I want to keep this quite short. I don't want it to get too long. So we'll start with Cycladic and then move straight into Archaic, Classical and Hellenistic. So here are a couple of Cycladic sculptures. The Cyclades is a group of islands off the main coast of Greece, and their culture began at about 2500 BC, which is the date of the left one. And they are very reduced in the amount of information that they give, these sculptures. They are really quite selective in the information that they give. And if you look at the one on the right-hand side, the head from the figure of a woman, I think there are little marks where eyes perhaps were, but other than that, you've just got the shape of the head, you've got the shape of the nose. We don't know why these sculptures were made. They were probably to do with whatever faith these people had. They might be goddesses. They're on the whole very small, and there are a lot of them, a huge number of them. They're in museums all over the world. They're in the Louvre and the British Museum, all over the place. Table-sized for the most part, but sometimes quite a lot larger. They were painted. There are traces of pigment on them. They're very, very beautiful, and they come from a prehistoric period, a period before anybody was writing at all, so we don't have any written information about what they represent. So if we look at the one on the left, the characteristic features are over here, the smoothness of the head and the straight nose. We've got a cylindrical neck usually. You can see it on this one, and then it's broken off from there. You've got the shoulders, and the arms are nearly always folded like this, particularly on the female figures and the standing figures. There are other figures which are performing functions like playing pipes or playing a harp, which obviously have the arms in a different position. Nearly always the left arm above the right arm. You can see usually a roundness of breasts when it's a female figurine, and you can usually see that triangular shape there. Here we've got fairly wide thighs. We don't always have that on these figures, and some of them, very few, are meant to kind of stand up on their own, and this one clearly isn't because the feet are angled downwards. When you look at something like this, it seems so modern. It seems very, very kind of up to date, and we don't think of people stylizing this much in the distant past, particularly in the Greek distant past. It's before the Greek classical period, so things from this point steadily become more and more realistic. Here we have a Cycladic figure, and I seem to have got the image slightly moved from the text, and I can't do anything about that at the moment, but it's a figure of a harp player, and you can see that the bottom ends of the arms are missing, and we don't know how they would have sat on the harp itself, but probably around here, around the harp, rather than on strings, because obviously you can't make strings with a marble sculpture like that. They're beautifully carved, very, very sophisticated work, and you can see the head is tilted back, the nose points upwards. There might be faint signs of where the eyes are, or even faint signs of where the mouth is, but not always. There are a number of these figures with harp players, and we'll just have a quick look at some others. Black and white photograph there. You can often see these things better in black and white, but very, very simplified sculpture. And here from the Ashmolean Museum, a group of theirs. The one on the far left is this one here, so you can see that although it doesn't look it from the straightforward photograph, the figure is actually tilted forward, left arm over right arm, and you can see the shape of the head much better. It looks kind of flat here, but when you see them from the side, they do look very different. And here are some in the Archaeology Museum in Athens, you can see the size of these. That one in the glass case central is particularly large, but mostly they're only a foot high, some kind of size like that. And here we have from various different museums. There's an interesting link there if you want to pause and copy that out. To the Getty Museum. And here we've got Constantine Brancusi and Amedeo Modigliani. Those two were friends, and both were extremely influenced. They're modern artists, obviously, 1918, the date of the one. Obviously influenced by Cycladic art, as well as other forms of art. This one in particular, from Modigliani, is very like some of the Cycladic heads that we've been seeing, and his paintings take the same form. Very, very long necks and sloping shoulders, though, but these rounded, egg-shaped heads with very, very kind of gentle features. Here we have Brancusi making the eye shapes quite prominent, but otherwise doing no detailing at all on his. And I was thinking about, why they did these sculptures. We don't know why they did. We're assuming religious kind of input of some sort. We're assuming that they might be fertility gods and goddesses. There are male and female figures, but there are more female than male. What are they doing there? Why are there so many? Many were found in graves, but many were not. What were they used for? What was their purpose? And we really don't know, because these people didn't write. It's just interesting to me that you would look at them and you would think, well, there are loads and loads of them. They have to have a religious purpose. What society would bother to make things in that volume, those numbers, if they didn't have some kind of important purpose one way or another? And then you only have to look at these Wade whimsies, these collectible animals that we see about, and they're in their millions. So maybe societies do things like that. We've now moved on to a different period in Greek art, and for many, many hundreds of years, the Greek civilization fell into what we call the Greek Dark Ages. And as it comes out of the Dark Ages, we start to get a new culture that's providing us with forms that we call Archaic Greek Art. And it's the start of the big rush towards classicism and then towards Hellenism. This bronze horse, which is in the Metropolitan Museum, is a fine, superb example of the horses that were made by the Greeks in the geometric period. They are small bronzes and they are solid cast. There's no lost wax casting here, and I'll talk about that another time, but not right now. So this is made from a solid sculpture. They're only small small pieces, made from a solid sculpture, which is then cast in sand, hard, firm sand put around it, and then bronze poured in, and a solid cast made of it. There are a lot of horses, a lot of soldiers, and one or two gods, goddesses, and strange beings that are made like this. And they are again, very stylized, but not so simplified as the works that we've just been looking at. They are generally with large ears, a large mane, and a trumpet-shaped nose, which is characteristic of the type. We have a kind of urge to produce very astonishing, I think, negative shapes, and the tail loops down and touches the floor here. Got very strange shaped knees at the front, and these shapes go on into their painted pots as well. We're going to look at ceramics in a short while. So we have these very simplified geometric horses, and here we've got a bronze man and a centaur, and if you look at the shape of the buttocks, the shape of the legs here, you can see that there's a tendency to make them into triangular shapes. These artists were aiming for triangles, they're aiming for a kind of structure in their work. We have for the Centaur, the figure of a man, smaller than this man, strange hats on their heads, and we have this narrow body and the long, long tail as well. And here's a Greek bronze warrior, and all of these are from the 8th century BC. And the artists are just beginning to look at what real people look like. If you look at the Greek warrior on the right, it's beginning to look more, well, what would you say, more normal, I suppose, more like a real person. And we move on from the geometric period into the Archaic period. And in the Archaic period, we start to get this movement towards what we think of as Greek classical sculpture. This is a Kouros statue. All Kouros statues, just of a young man. They're all young men. That's what it means. And we're now here in the 6th century BC, and the Kouros statues are particularly alike. There are a lot of them, and they're usually grave markers. Usually a young athlete or a young soldier would be buried or cremated, and this grave marker would be put on the grave. They didn't at this time always use gravestones. They used these statues. The corresponding type of a woman was usually placed in a temple. These were sometimes placed in temples as well, as helpers for the gods, as kind of aids to the gods, and the women usually would have held a tray. So the identifying features of a Kouros statue, very Egyptian in manner, in that the figure is absolutely straightforward, facing straight forward, not relaxed at all. And we see this beautiful face with what we call the Archaic Smile. They nearly all have this little smile, these eyes looking straight forward. And the Archaic Smile was something that seems to have been reproduced by Leonardo in the Mona Lisa. We class that as an Archaic Smile as well. We've got the hairstyle here, and the standing figure is very, very straight. The shoulders are absolutely level, the breasts are absolutely level, the hips are level, and one leg comes forward, the other leg is slightly back, which is just the same as the Greek versions of statues. But when we look at the anatomy, it's quite realistic in many ways, perfected, but quite realistic with the shape of the rib cage and the shape of the stomach muscles underneath. So there are a lot of these statues, and the female version, called Akuro, means girl in ancient Greek. This is the Peplos Cora, and it's called that because the kind of dress that she's wearing is called a peplos. Now, these were originally painted in really bright colours, and all Greek sculpture was painted in colours that to us look really strong, really kitschy, if you like, and we tend to prefer them without the colour. We tend to think of the glorious stone colour of these statues, but they were all brightly coloured, and often you get exhibitions of plaster casts which are painted up by various museums and art galleries so that we can see how they would once have looked. Very strange they look as well. So with the ladies, with the Cora statues, they experimented with hairstyles. We see the most amazing hairstyles. We see the most fantastic clothing and pleating and all manner of kind of fashion statements from the time that fashion designers nowadays look to get inspiration. They're standing there. Most of them would have had one arm coming forward, and we've lost that arm in most cases. Would often have been put on separately. Can't have been done all in one because it sticks out forwards, and the marble, the stone, won't allow for that. So they would have had another arm fixed in, and it would have carried a tray with something on it, and this figure would have been inside a temple. There are other Kouros statues that you can see, and Kouros statues that you can see behind in this photograph. And here we have the original Peplos Cora, the one that you've just seen on the left, and a painted version of it. They know what colours were on these statues. Usually they can see the finest, tiniest traces of pigment, particularly if they analyse it scientifically. I think just by eye you probably can't. And so in the casts galleries, they're often painted up in their proper colours, as the originals would have been. And the Museum of Classical Archaeology in Cambridge has got some like that. The Ashmolean in Oxford had a large exhibition of painted up plaster casts of these sculptures a couple of years back. So that's what they would have been like in the temples and on the temple fronts, and for the Kouros statues, the male figures on the gravestones, all painted. Here we have a couple more Cora figures. You can see the different clothing. The one on the left has got this kind of off the shoulder look, which has also got clothing underneath, and the wonderful hairstyles that fall down over their shoulders, all of them with an arm that would have held a tray, and the wonderful folds and pleats that hang down, different headdresses. Archaic Smile. And there we have a Cora on the left and the Kouros on the right, a couple of Sphinxes behind. The Sphinxes are very interesting from this archaic period. They're often on top of a column. You can see them on top of a column. You can see one on top of a column in this slide. And they are grave markers. They're connected with funerals, and on the Greek pots, the paintings on the pots, we see them as the female, always female, and on the pots they have their claws out and they're hanging on to a dead youth, a young soldier that's been killed on the battlefield, and they're taking his soul away, and the claws claw into the back of the figure. They're really quite sinister figures, and they're the creatures that take the souls of the dead killed on the battlefield, take them off to wherever they're going. So here is Sphinx, a female Greek Sphinx, sitting on top with an archaic smile, sitting on top of this marble stele, a grave marker, a gravestone, and there's an image of a youth beneath it, the young man who's died. And we don't usually have them as complete as this. This is one of the most complete, and it's inscribed on the base, as it says, which his father and his dear mother set up the monument, which is really quite sad, I suppose. Looking at another Kouros statue, is that the one we saw before? I think I might have put it in again to go back to where we were. And a whole range of them here, a whole set of them, where you can see the development towards the more natural form on the far right. We see this slow development from the very austere, almost Egyptian style through to the much more relaxed style on the far right. And if you actually look at the first and last ones, you see the hips are absolutely level, the breasts and shoulders are level, and the figure is, although stepping forward, very formal, very frontal. And no account made for the step forward in the angle of the hips. And you come to the last one and you can see the softness of the form, the greater realism of the torso, and the angle of the hips being slightly different and ever so slightly lower on the leg, which is bent. More Kouros statues to look at. I've given you one where we can see the back and the side to show you how they look. Retaining the shape of the marble block like the Egyptian ones did, not looking very relaxed but becoming more and more realistic. And as we move along in time, we are sometimes not in time, sometimes some cities are more advanced in their art than some of the more provincial ones, which retain the older styles for longer, so date isn't always a clear indicator of what the style is going to be. But this one, this idealised youth, is becoming more natural and more realistic. And stepping forward now into the classical period, we're in the 5th century for this sculpture. We're at a period now where we have difficulties with it because most of the Greek statues were made, most of the Greek statues like this, the classical statues, were made in bronze. Not all of them, but most of them. Those that were made in bronze, the metal tends to have been used for other things. They've been melted down. So we have very few of the bronzes left. We have enough to see what they were like, and they were very, very beautiful and very detailed. The Romans, however, loved the Greek bronzes, and they copied them in marble. And this one is, we've got the name of the original artist, Polycletos, and excuse my pronunciations because I don't read Greek. And this one is reproduced more times. There are other versions of this, and if you Google it, you'll find plenty of other versions where the original Greek copy has been copied by a Roman carver. So they're all the same pose and they're all very similar, but they're not exactly the same. We get an idea of what the original was like from them. The original probably would not have had that, this thing here, which is a tree trunk, one supposes, with fabric thrown over it, carved in marble and attached to his leg. Probably wouldn't have had that because marble is very brittle and it breaks very easily. And the weight of this stone is too much for the tiny ankles, so we tend to get a tripod. It's the same on Michelangelo's David. He had to do the same thing. We tend to get a tripod effect, and this is acting like a buttress to support the whole statue. And bronze doesn't need that to happen. We don't have that in bronze at all. And by this time, by the time that the Greeks were doing bronzes like this, they were using a lost wax method, which I'm not going to explain right at the moment, but which enabled the sculpture to be hollow and therefore a lot lighter. It's not a solid casting process. And with a much lighter sculpture, they could make it thicker around the ankles and it would support the whole weight, so they wouldn't have needed that in the original bronze. So we have here a lovely classical statue, and what's happened now is the invention, I suppose, if you can call it an invention, of this particular pose, which is called the Contrapposto Pose. Contrapposto with two P's, and it's where the shoulders go down at an angle. The hips go down at a different angle. It makes a triangular shape across there. The one leg is bent and the other leg is straight. All the weight is on that leg. And it means that there's a softening up of the pose. The gaze is usually somewhere else, not straight forward at us, like the Kouros statues were staring straight at us. And it's much more natural in the sort of living quality of the pose. The Contrapposto pose is really important and was imitated all the time during the Renaissance as well. But we have an idealized form. And the Greeks, they wanted to make everything perfect on these figures because these figures are kind of immortal, and they were about longevity and about perfection and about being about not being human in a sense, because human frailties are never depicted. They are intended to be close to the gods. They're intended to be godly and godlike. Sometimes they represent gods, sometimes they don't. They often represent athletes. And they are absolutely perfect as the Greeks could make them, which means that they are as far away from the animal side of our humanity as they can possibly be. Absolutely perfect forms, but perfect in expression also. In terms of proportions and faces, they went for an average. The most beautiful was kind of an average. Mouths were not too big, not too small. Noses not too huge, not too tiny. Everything perfect, and no expression. We tend to look at these sculptures and think, well, they're very expressionless, but that was important because it's about not showing emotions and not showing animal instincts at all. And laughing was considered to be kind of like snarling. So we see no expression, they're expressionless. And also in terms of the other part of the male anatomy, that's often quite small because they wanted to make the figures closer to the gods and away from the animals, away from the concept of animal, well, animality, I suppose I can call it. So perfect and pure, and I'm afraid because of the Victorian attitude to these sculptures, we've often lost certain parts of their anatomy, and some museums have got drawers full of them. And Queen Victoria, when she was shown Michelangelo's David, which is based on this kind of sculpture, had to have a little bronze fig leaf put on so that she wasn't appalled by what she saw. So looking at the naturalism of these perfectly beautiful figures, they're nearly always male at this stage. This is, again, the 5th century BC. They didn't tend to want the female form quite as much at this time. They're after an athletic body, and the women didn't compete in the games or anything like that. So they want what they considered it to be the perfectly beautiful, godlike human being, which for them was male, and they like to show the muscles under the skin. And it's often been thought that for depictions of women, there's too much fat around, too many different layers, and you can't see the beauty of the muscular structure beneath. So this is a 5th century torso, which is in the Louvre. And here we have Hermes with the infant Dionysus. He's lost his arm, which is very sad. Sometimes the arms were put on separately, and when that's the case and it's been lost, you can often see just up here a little square hole for the pin that would have fixed the arm onto the shoulder. But this one was clearly done as a whole, and we've lost it therefore. Beautiful face, curly hair, very expressionless almost, but maybe a slight smile. He's dealing with a baby there. And the Contrapposto Pose, this time swayed over even more. This is 4th century rather than 5th century, and swayed over even more. And this being the structure that supports it all, being the buttress that supports it all. And here's my favourite slide of this lecture. There's another spear bearer after Polycletos from the 5th century BC, and Daniel Craig on the right. And I thought it's a nice comparison here of the shapes. You can see the shape, you can see how realistic this perfect form is, because this perfect form is actually real. You can see the way that the, can I call it a six-pack, is done there. And it's often been said to me that men don't have that area above the hips, that area of muscle above the hips, but sometimes you can see just a little bit. And the pose here, Daniel Craig is in a very contrapposto pose. That's rather interesting. This shows the influence on later art. This is a 16th century version of Adam in a full contrapposto pose, but now with a fig leaf, just in case somebody a little bit prudish might look at it. We have the discus thrower, which is a classical image. There are various versions of this because the original sculptor Myron did it in bronze, and the Romans copied it. It's called the Discobolus. I have no idea how you pronounce that, so you might have to look it up. Yes. The one on the left, the head has been wrongly restored, and he wasn't looking down, he was looking back up at his discus, as in the one on the right. In terms of the female forms, the Medici Venus is on the left, and this pose is called the Venus Pudica pose. It's a contrapposto pose, and her hands cover her breast and her pubic area. There are many versions of it with different supporting structures to act as the tripod bit. She's acting as if she's taken unawares. She's turning her head to one side to look at a viewer that might have just popped up on the scene, and she's looking a little bit coy. She's hiding herself. The Medici one, against the dark background there, she's almost hiding herself. And this again was something that was picked up by the Renaissance artists and used constantly, Botticelli in particular using it. So we can see this contrapposto form and the female form looking a little bit kind of surprised, a little bit koi. And this was very, very fashionable in the Roman times. They copied the Greek version. We come to the Elgin Marbles. The Elgin Marbles are in the British Museum, and they were brought over by Lord Elgin, and there is the big debate as to whether we should give them back. We probably won't, I would think. We can't all give all of the works back. This is the problem. But the thing with the Elgin marbles is that they're from the Parthenon in Athens. And the Parthenon is the symbol for Athens, and Athens is the capital of Greece. So maybe these are more important to the Greeks than any others. But we will see some which are in a Berlin museum a little bit later on. And there are plenty in the Louvre. And I presume it's because of the focus on this being from the Parthenon in Athens that we keep getting these requests by the Greeks to give them back. I'm in two minds myself. I'm kind of ambivalent about it. Sometimes I think they should have it back because it's their perfect artwork. Sometimes I think we should hang on to it. I think we probably saved it from destruction looking at what's left there, but maybe that's no reason to hang on to these. When you look at them, they are absolutely superb. And they're well worth going to the British Museum to see when it opens up again. They are often not crowded. In the British Museum, people seem to head straight for the Egyptian mummies, so there's often not crowds in the room with the Elgin marbles, and these are so beautiful. So if we look at the river god there, it's actually Dionysus, but he's in the manner of a river god, and sometimes on the pediments of temples, if it is a river god, they'd have an urn here pouring out water, but instead this one, which is possibly Dionysus, Heracles, has got fabric instead. Beautiful, relaxed, perfect form, fairly expressionless in the face, and you can see though that it's wonderfully carved over the torso and very, very relaxed. A really living, idealized male figure. And there it is from the front. This is, I think, one of the most beautiful sculptures in the world. I think it's absolutely tremendous. The power, the strength, the poised relaxation. And it was lent to the Hermitage. And there it is from the back. The only back view I've found that's decent is this one, where we see all the people ogling it from the other side as it was on loan to the Hermitage in 2014. Here are the three goddesses from the east pediment of the Parthenon, the pediment, of course, being the triangular shape that's supported the roof. And you can see how the sculptor has moulded the fabrics around the form of the women. The idealised Greek woman was heavier than our tendency to idealise now makes women slimmer, and it tended to be heavier in those days. The way the fabric falls over the body is superb. The designer and main sculptor and main architect of the Parthenon was Phidias, Pheidias. And his work was astonishing. So the beautiful, relaxed, soft, moving, living quality of these tends to be called damp fold. We have damp fold from different periods of art history, but where the fabric looks as if it's dampened and shows the form of the body underneath. And we have the horses from the pediment with the veins showing, the nostrils wide. This horse's head would be hanging over the edge of the pediment, so they've put it on a plinth that does the same, a bit of the mane. Remember that it's to go very high up on the wall, and that it would also have been painted. And we have the rest of the Elgin marbles. Shown here is a frieze of a procession around the inside of the temple. I'm not going to go into details about the myths and about the processions and such like at the moment, because I'm concentrating. I haven't got a lot of time, and I'm concentrating on style. But you can see the way the horses are done. They're rearing up. They're beautifully delineated, and they've got veins and they've got manes and flared nostrils. And we can see the beautiful, again, relaxed rider sitting on the horse. No stirrups or anything at this time. Also, from the Acropolis Museum, from the Parthenon, but in the Acropolis Museum, this figure of Nike, Athena Nike, the goddess of sport, hence Nike trainers and such like, and she's adjusting her sandal. And I've given you two images of the same thing because the light is different on each of them, and the light, it really does make a difference. And they would have had the sun coming round, and you'd be able to see it in different lights, and it would look different at different times of the day. And you can see the form of the fabric over the legs, these beautiful folds here, and the folds over the arm, and the showing of the breasts. This is a gravestone, and it's a beautiful idealized figure with a sorrowing child there. It's the grave of a young man, and we see the Greeks becoming incredibly natural in how they're portraying human beings, and they're becoming even less mannered now. There is a sense now of expression. The philosopher or the father or whatever on the right-hand side is probably a philosopher contemplating death, looking concerned, the hand up to the face. The child sorrowing on the steps there. There's a sense of drama beginning in these works. And so we're now into the later period, the period that comes after the classical period, which is called the Hellenistic period. And this temple in Berlin is from the 2nd century BC. It's the great altar of Pergamon, and it gives the museum its name. It's the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And it shows the battle of Olympian gods versus the Titans. They have in Berlin the whole of the temple steps, the temple front, the columns up here, one or two of the sculptures that would have been on top, most of the frieze around this area, and you can go up here and sit and look at the other side, and then all around the back to the left and right of us on the walls and behind us are the most amazing sculptures, all in a frieze going all the way around. It must have been phenomenal when it was done. And now this is Hellenistic sculpture. And Hellenistic sculpture becomes much more muscular, much more powerful, incredibly dramatic, live action kind of scenes. We see expressions on faces, but the figures are still idealized. But they actually show the harshness of movement sometimes. We start to see muscles in extremity. We start to see veins standing out. We start to see tendons and dramatic poses that we wouldn't have seen in the classical period. We've gone from the relaxed pose of the Contrapposto now into something really much more dynamic. And you can see on this how the action goes one way and then it goes the other way. It makes a kind of U shape across here, so that we've got action running from left to right with this female figure. We've got action going from right to left with this figure, and we've got the snakes and monsters all wrapped around, and the drama of the hairstyle. This hair is wild and curly and free, not like the tight curls that we had in the classical sculptures that we saw earlier. And these are, it's a truly wonderful frieze. We've got these Titan-like figures that are part monster, part snake or serpent or whatever, and we've got the figure of the older man with the beard and the expression on his face. He looks like he's dying, and the muscles here and the can I call it flab, but the fold of the skin there between the belly and the rib cage there. I don't know what's happening here, but something's got hold of his head, and it's just so hyper dramatic. This figure, we've lost part of it, stepping up onto there, and the action is looking both ways. It's looking back, it's looking forward. They're astonishing pieces of work from Berlin in the Pergamon. So if you go to the British Museum and the Elgin Marbles to see how classicism develops from its very straight upright phase to something more dynamic, and then to Berlin and the Pergamon to see how it develops into an extraordinary movement. When you look at this back and buttocks, and you look at the muscles and the strain on it, we haven't had that before. The carvings from the classical period look very soft by comparison, but all are extremely beautiful. The dynamic nature of the folds and the deep carving so that it catches shadow, and we can see the drama more because of it. And also from this period, it's about 100 BC, and also Hellenistic, is this image of Aphrodite, which is known as the Venus of Melos, or the Venus de Milo, which is in the Louvre. And it comes from the island of Melos in the Cyclades in Greece, and it couldn't be more different from the Cycladic figurines that I started with. And we see her, she's lost her arms, and the Louvre have done various reconstructions, which you can see if you go there, or if you Google, you can see them. We don't quite know how her arms were. But she's a beautiful female figure. She's very, very natural. She's quite heavy, because the Greeks, even at this stage, still liked the heavier figure. And she's got the very straight nose. And this wonderful soft garment that falls over her. And you can see that when you see her from the back, you can see the same way that the garment curves around, although most of these sculptures were intended to be seen only from the front or the side and not from the back. They still finished off the backs of them. And I think that the views we've got here are very straight up and down, but what makes it, particularly in terms of style, Hellenistic, is the curve and the sway. She is actually dancing, she's moving, she's swaying, and you can see it better in this particular view, and you can perhaps see it better in the black and white photograph on the left, which is why I've put it in. You can see that she's angling forward. The head is quite small now. The head often in the classical figures gets smaller and smaller unless it's showing emotion, particularly in a man, where it gets bigger. And you can see that she's moving. The slope of the shoulders and the slope of the hips, the contrapposto is really exaggerated, and so is the leg that's coming forward, and she's swaying and dancing. You can almost imagine the music that she's moving to. And this is the Victory of Samothrace, which is also in the Louvre. And I've given you a view here of it at the top of that staircase rising up, which is how it probably might have originally looked. And it is a victory figure. Here she is. The Greek victories were messengers from the gods, and they bring message of victory, but they can also bring message of defeat and so on. And they eventually give rise to Christian angels. The angels are messengers from God, and they are winged beings, usually male originally, but become female in the Victorian period. Here, the victories are personifications of victory, and they're nearly always female. Most Greek personifications of vices or of virtues or whatever were female. And she again is very Hellenistic in the amount of movement. We haven't got her head or her arms, but the wings and the way that she's alighted. She's on a boat. She's on the front of a boat here, which is possibly the way that she would have been originally. And the way that the fabric falls over her body looks as if she's alighting, and she's got the wind against her, and it's blowing against the form of the torso here. So you can see the belly button through there, and the wind is blowing the fabric back. Very dynamic, very powerful image, a very famous image, this one, and it was very, very well known in the early part of the 20th century. And here we have the Laocoon group, which is also 1st century BC and was found in Italy. The Romans of this period loved Greek art, and they often employed Greek artists and Greek sculptors. And this is probably done by these eminent sculptors from Rhodes. They've got their names there, Hagasander and Polydorus, and Athenodorus. My pronunciations are probably terrible. And it is an amazing sculpture. It's in the Vatican. And it's one of the things they take you to see if you do your tour of the Vatican Museum. It's 8 feet high. And it was partly dug up, or it was dug up partly by Michelangelo, and was of a major, major influence from him. It was once thought that it could possibly have been a forgery by Michelangelo of an ancient Greek work, and he is known to have forged works from the past. But in this instance, it's probably not the case. It shows Laocoon, who's upset the gods and is being eaten, being killed by serpents along with his sons. And this is incredibly Hellenistic. You can see the concentration on the muscles and bones of the knees, on the muscles here, the tautness of the muscles. You can see veins in the feet. You can see the twist. This is called twisted contrapposto, where the shoulders are twisted round and are not in the same plane as the hips. And you can see the expression on his face, which is terrified and dying, and the worry. Can you call it worry when you're dying, when you're being killed, of the sons as they look to him to try and save them. And these are the boys, the expression on their faces perhaps a little bit less expressive than his. The whole thing is incredibly dynamic in a way that a lot of earlier Greek classical art isn't, but in the manner of the Pergamon Temple, and it is dynamic there. A sweeping diagonal up or down, whichever way you want it to go, and then crisscrossing shapes that tie it all together. And the problems of it was probably not carved all in one piece, but the problems of the marble and the bits that break off is that you lose limbs, you lose arms and things because of the structure of the marble being brittle and having and being on a strata, so things can break off. These act as buttresses. The snakes, the serpents, are acting as buttresses. So this arm, that we've lost the hand there, but this arm is held on by being a buttress and being buttressed onto this, and the snake is biting his hip, which gives us another buttressing effect. It's all linked together, and the boy's cloak hanging down like that, and the raising of the form on a plinth like that allows for this wonderful dynamic triangular composition that we've got. And we'll look at some details of it because it's a truly amazing sculpture. It's justifiably very, very famous and of massive influence onto Michelangelo and Renaissance and Baroque sculpture such as that by Bernini. Look at the wrinkles on his face. Look at the expression of the eyebrows there. The mouth open. You can see the top teeth there. The curly hair, the torment of the whole figure. And you can see here the strain of the muscles, the tendons and veins on the arms. So I want to now move on to painting. Now the Greeks painted their interiors. They painted on plaster, but most of their buildings, apart from the temples, would have been wattle and daub, and we've lost a lot of them. There are some left, but we've lost a lot of them. And the best way to see the painting style is through the pots. They painted on pots. I haven't time here to go into the details of how the pots were made. It's quite complicated, and it's all on YouTube anyway. You can see it on you can Google it, and you can see it on YouTube as well. The firing process, the oxidizing process, the color of the slip when it's black was the same as the pot, the fabric of the pot. It's just fired in a different way, where one oxidizes more and the other doesn't, and it gives you a different color. So I'll let you look that up if you're interested. You may not be. And I want to now talk about the style of the paintings. From the period when we had those horses with the trumpet-shaped snouts, we get this period of geometric drawing on pots. This is called the Greek key shape. It's a key design, and it was picked up many, many times through art history, and even by the Victorians. And we have it on, I don't know, it's on my wardrobe upstairs, my Victorian sort of early 20th century wardrobe. It gets on the edges of carpets. I've got a ring with it on. It's everywhere. And there seems to be almost a fear of leaving a gap. This has been restored here, of course. But they like to ornament over the whole surface with zigzags and various different geometric shapes. An amphora is a pot with a narrower neck and arms, handles here that go from the shoulders to the neck of the pot. They're often very narrow at the bottom. This one has a stand. They often do have a base. Sorry, it's got a base, and they often do have. But many amphora in ancient Egypt and in the early stages of Greek ceramics, they were pointed at the bottom and could be dug into the sand or put into a coil of rope to be kept upright. But it meant that they stacked better on ships. If they've got a pointed bottom, they can stack within each other into a V shape. So for transportation, they were often pointed at the bottom and needed a different base to sit on. So if we look at the development, and this is 8th century, we have pots predominantly for funeral wear. They often have ashes and bones in the cremated remains of a person. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they were put on a grave, like the Kouros statues were. Sometimes they're found in graves. They are mostly funeral wear, but obviously sometimes they were used for important feasts and such like. And we have this here, which is really quite important. I've put another pot with it. We've got all of the geometric decoration still in place here, so it's still a geometric amphora. But if you look at these figures, these mourning figures, they've got triangular bodies, triangular buttocks, and triangular calf muscles. And we see here the dead person lying on a bier with the family around, and more decoration, key decoration here, bands and bands of decoration, and I think these are deer walking across there. It's a beautiful pot. It's been burnished to make it shine. And we see a similar thing that is sort of similar to this, a row of animals walking all the way around the pot. The Greek key decoration here and through here and along here. And these wonderful birds. Look at the birds. Ducks maybe walking around the pot. These Greek geometric pots are beautiful pieces of work. And the decoration is always in black on the background terracotta colour. So here we have a crater. A crater is not an amphora. It's a wide-necked jar, usually used for storing bigger things like olives or something, or for mixing wine with water. They used to mix wine with water, and for grave markers, and sometimes these can be very, very large indeed. They were nearly always thrown. I don't know about the very, very big ones, whether they were coil made or whether they were thrown, but the Greeks did throw pots on a wheel. You can see the Greek geometric pattern around the top, and this has got the mourners here, which are actually, there's a rectangle around the head, which is their arms, and they're tearing at their hair. They would be paid mourners, and they would be wailing and hair tearing, and there in between them are bits of decoration. The Greeks at this stage didn't like to leave parts of the pot undecorated. We have a tabletop, a bier, with the body on it, with its triangular torso and its triangular calf muscles, and above it a row of faces with a dot in the middle to suggest looking at us. A figure at its feet, presumably the man's wife, sat on a stool, and various animals and creatures around here, other mourners all around here, and a canopy to fill in that space at the top. It's in bands. We've got bands of decoration, and through here is the procession. It could be a funeral procession. It might be a victory procession from some battle that the person had won in life. And these are shields with little arm holes, holes for the spear, holes They're kind of figure of 8 shaped, if you like, shields. And here we've got a row of horses. Each horse is shown separately with 3 heads with their geometric shaped snouts like we saw before on the sculpture, and 3 pairs of legs at the front, 3 pairs of legs at the back, and a chariot. And our man is a charioteer. And then we've got a bigger figure with spears and a shield, and another chariot coming on behind. This one is called the Françoise vase, and it's in Florence. And this is wonderful. It's on the cusp between geometric ware and what we call black figure ware. And Greek black figure ware is always drawn in black on a terracotta coloured background. And here the horses are displayed so beautifully. The style, the ornamentation. We have here our 3 horses again, but their heads are in different directions, and this artist has taken pains to separate out the 2 behind from the one in front, and the pattern is delightful. And then there's pattern on fabrics and drawing on the horses, which show up because it's scored into with a point. The drawing is scored in and is very, very refined. And these artists love the negative shapes. The shapes in between things are so important. The aesthetic of the patterning, the repetition, the spaces, and the fact that it's built up in tiers, one above the other, is just magical. You can see a temple here with an amphora pot inside it, and these amazing creatures here. This is a sphinx in the middle, but these are the creatures and the beautiful shapes that they make. This hog, I don't know, fighting people. It's a beautiful, beautiful vase. Very, very famous one from the 6th century BC. And there's another figure of it, and I can give you a detail. So a crater, a wide-necked pot, the same name, I suppose, for the craters of the moon, but it's spelt with a K, and it's got these wonderful scroll arms on it. And here's a detail of it, and you can see that the black is sometimes made thinner and sometimes goes to red with a different type of slip, or a thinner slip. A slip is clay that's mixed with water, and it makes a paint. It makes a kind of paste or a paint that can be used. And this strange looking thing, looks a bit like a frog. Those are the handles on a bronze vessel, a tripod bronze vessel. And these were given to the victors of games, of races and of battles. And they occur quite often. They're in museums, and there are a lot in these paintings on pots. The repetition of these figures with their hands and their garments, the beautiful scoring in to get the lines, and the decoration of the horses, their manes, the beauty of the way that this is drawn, and that wonderful separation of one leg from the others. These are tremendous works. And looking at the scroll arms of this pot, even that is decorated. This is one side, that's the other side. You can see that these creatures are different. So that's the other arm on the other side, with a winged goddess holding these 2 animals, and the same here. You can see her arms better on this side than you can there, but she's holding these 2 animals. They look almost heraldic, and I love the curve of the tails on this one. And we see a soldier carrying a dead soldier over his shoulder. It's a depiction of a myth, and the hair hanging down, and the beautiful lines drawn in to show the knees and the calf muscles and so on, and the helmet, of course, a typical Greek helmet. There it is in greater detail. And there has been some red slip put on this as well. It's beautifully ornamented when you look at the careful way that the hair has been done. And this is just a small image on the handle. It's not even on the main pot. And you can see the arm coming round, holding holding on tight. It's just beautiful. And other images, we've got the hog that I showed you at the top, and a dead dog, wolf, creature of some sort, probably a dog. The hog is being fought by these two men, one behind the other, and the figure is lying down here. Beautiful kind of dying pose, I suppose. And the chariot, the horses drawing the chariot with that bronze victory vase. Look at all those legs at the back of the horses. Beautifully done. Set up to be a pattern. So when we get into later Greek black figure ware, we have much more space around, a lot of blank areas, and the geometric the geometric drawing is reduced to just a band at the top, a band at the bottom of the picture, a bit at the base of the amphora, a bit around the arms, and so on. And we can see there's a chess game being played. The negative spaces here are delightful. Look at this little bit just touching, almost touching there. The shapes in between the legs, the spears that identify more negative shapes. It is a delight, and these swirls. Now, the Greek black figure ware carried on for a certain amount of time, and then at a certain point, they start to do red figure ware. And from the classical period and the Hellenistic period, the pots are, or from the later classical period and the Hellenistic period, the pots are red figure rather than black figure. And this enabled them to do the figures, to paint round the figures with the black slip, and to leave the figures in the terracotta colour of the pot, the ceramic behind. And they still keep the negative spaces beautiful, but they can now draw details on with a brush or a pen of some sort, rather than having to score it in, and they become much more natural. Like the classical figures relax and then move on to the Hellenistic figures, which are more dynamic. These do the same. And many artists were proud of their ability to do both. And so we have pots that have the same scene on one side in black figure ware, and then on the other side in red figure ware. And they can show that this is more stylized and that's more natural, and then later on we get just the red figure ware. And these pots are called bilingual pots. This is a bilingual amphora with Ajax and Achilles, and it's in Boston. And here is another similar one. It's called the belly amphora because it's got a wide belly, and it's got a red figure version on one side and a black figure version on the other. And you can see how stylized the artist can make it on one side, and this was perfectly acceptable, perhaps a little old-fashioned by now, and the more natural version on the other side in red figure ware. And this pot, you can see the dates there, 520 to 510 BC. We now know the names sometimes of the artists, and occasionally we know the name of the potter. Sometimes it's signed by both, sometimes it's just signed by one or the other. If it's signed by one or the other, it's more commonly signed by the painter. But sometimes it's signed by both. Sometimes the painter is the potter, but that's more rare. Usually the pots were made and then they were passed on to a painter to decorate. And here we have black figure ware, attributed to the eagle painter, and we can see this many-headed creature being attacked, and you can see the point that's drawn into these. I've put this on because I love the crab. It's round here on this, under the handle. I just love that crab. It looks like it could have come out of, I don't know, a Tintin cartoon or something. Another black figure, Amphora Formatica, which shows you olive gathering. And it's quite stylized. You can see the strange olive branches and this figure up in the tree picking them off, and these guys hitting the tree to shake them off, and the olives are falling down and this man is gathering them up. A bit of remaining Greek key pattern here and other layers of patterning. And on this one, we've got a perfect example of 5th century red figure ware. Now, this is beautiful, and it depicts a sculptor's workshop, not a scene of torture or anything like that. It has a man operating bellows here for a furnace for bronze casting. They've got their drawings in black figure style on the wall. They've got tools hanging up on the wall, and not hands and feet, but carved or cast hands and feet waiting to be put onto the sculpture. And it shows you how things are made. If we start at the left, we've got this lovely figure with the bellows, and his hair is curly like in the Greek classical statues, but you can see the terracotta coloured outline that's been left for him, and you can see the lines that have been painted on, because the painting technique is much more refined now that they're not scoring into it with a point, and now they're drawing. This man with his yellow plastic hard hat is putting something in to the furnace that's being kept hot by this character over here, and you can see here that the shape of his knees is drawn, and there's a straight line, well, it's not exactly straight, a slightly curved line coming down the front of the shin bone to identify that. We don't see clearly how the thighs fit onto the body, but we do see a lovely row of toes here, so this foot is very foreshortened. And then we step over here, and as ever, when you get a couple of guys doing all the work, somebody else is standing watching, and that's what's going on here. And you see this convention for the knee and the line coming down the shin bone and the feet seen from the front. It's a wonderful convention, and it's a style, it's a type of style that you often get in much more contemporary cartoons or comic strips, comic books, that kind of thing. Graphic novels, they develop a style, a way in which you recognise something as a viewer, and that's the style of knee and shin bone. And we can see that he's leaning on his hammer, and his shoulder is raised because of that. Other than that, it's a lovely contrapposto pose. He's got his hand on his hip. We move over to this one, and this man is not casting but carving, maybe. It looks like this figure is still on the stone, and it would be released from the stone at a later point. So it looks like a carving. And as is typical of a lot of Greek works, the hands are put on separately. You can see a line at the wrist, so maybe he's banging the hand into place. And the head is waiting to go on afterwards. Wonderful image. And it's called the Berlin Foundry Cup because it's in Berlin and it represents a Greek foundry. And the other side of it is a couple of sculptors looking very small against the huge statue that they're preparing, and they're refining it and scraping it down and polishing it. Huge statue of a warrior. And the red figure ware is very carefully, very delicately drawn. And these, it's just superb to go and see these in any gallery that's got them. The Ashmolean's got them if you want to go reasonably locally. It's the odd one or two in Cheltenham Art Gallery and Museum. But if you go to the big museums like the British Museum or the Louvre or Berlin, they have a lot of them, and they are incredibly beautiful. They're some of the most beautiful forms of black line drawing that has ever occurred. So this is the inside of the cup of the Berlin Foundry Cup. It's the inside of the cup bits. So the whole thing was decorated. So this is a concave cup shape at the top, and it's got this lovely sculptor with his little hammer there, sat down, chipping away at a goddess. It's probably Athena. There's a helmet about to go on her. And just to show that it is still a sculptor's workshop, we've got these tools here. Very, very beautiful indeed. One of my favourites of the interior of a cup is this one, also in Berlin, where these two soldiers, one's been wounded, and the artist has used a white slip to put on this, I forgot what the word is, bandage, that's the word I'm looking for, to put the bandage on, and the man's looking away like you do when you've got something hurt and you don't want to look at it, and he's holding it up, and they are very, very carefully sorting out this wound. You can see the white of his teeth there. This is a beautiful head, and the way this figure is crouching down and the bend of the foot, it's quite a remarkable piece. And as we move on, you can see the great realism that comes into these drawings. This is a red figure crater, and it's in the Louvre, and I love it for the negative shapes, along with the way that the figures are drawn. And this is such a beautiful figure, I thought I'd put it in for you to look at separately. All the lines are drawn in to show the stomach muscles, to show the rib cage, to show the breast area, the light that's left around his hair, the curl of his ear, the expression on his face is really quite marvellous. And the way this man is holding his leg, they're very, very carefully observed. Look at the foreshortening of those toes on a foot. You try drawing that is really difficult to draw. And the foreshortening of that hand, where we see the fingers behind the first finger and the thumb on the floor, it's so delicately drawn and carefully observed. And that head, I think, is very dramatic. And you can see in this reproduction that I found, the fact that the black paint is actually quite thick. It's slip, and it's actually it can be quite thick, and it's caught the light on here, which shows you the texture of it, and that it's sometimes thinned off like it is on this hair, so that it goes a thinner shade of brown. And here, my last slide is another crater, and I really like this one. It's very, very complicated. It's really a stage play more than anything else. It's a rehearsal for a drama, and it's on 2 levels, but the artist hasn't made the levels separate. So you see the feet of the top level coming down into the lower area, and we see various figures, these very almost sexual figures dancing like figures of Pan. We've got masks. That's a mask. This figure is holding a mask, and so therefore this is probably a person dancing with a mask on. These were masked plays quite often. We see a wonderful figure here, gorgeous design along here of this form playing pipes. The Contrapposto Poses, another mask being held here. But what I really like about this one is the 3-dimensional quality, in that the figures, the foreground figures, break the boundary. It's as if they're on a stage and this is behind them. So we have a real sense of 3-dimensional picture space going on here, as well as pattern and ornament, which is carried through to the bottom here, where this figure is dancing over the key pattern that we've got at the bottom. It's really quite remarkable. It's a remarkable advancement in a drawing technique. Look at the clothing that this figure's wearing, and there's a lot going on here, and it's been highlighted in a few places by this white slip. That looks like it's intended to be a mask without a face, so that your own face shows through. So on that note, we will finish.